Jessica Stamper, your Director of Safety and Human Resources. I am here with Officer Jones, who is going to go over the pre-trip inspection. All right, so I'm going to give it to you.
I'm Officer Jones, Georgia Department of Public Safety. I'm going to go over a quick pre-trip inspection with you. I'm going to get the driver, turn on all your lights. First thing we're going to do is we're going to check our lights on the front, make sure everything's working on the front of the vehicle. Switch between high beam and low beam. Alright, turn your four ways off. Left blinker. Right blinker. Alright, you turn your blinker off. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to be looking to make sure the truck's sitting correctly, make sure there's no leaning and there's no leaking. Make sure there's no fluids leaking out from under the vehicle. After we make sure there's no leaning or leaking, we're going to open the hood of the truck and check under the hood. I got it. Alright, now when we check under the hood, there's a few different things we're going to be checking for. Alright, first thing we're going to be looking at, the steering column. We want to make sure the steering column has no movement in it, has no play. Make sure there's no wear on either U-joint on your steering column. Then going down to your gearbox, we're making sure that the gearbox is connected to the frame securely, that there's no broken or cracked areas on the gearbox. Next, we're going to move down to the pitman arm, make sure the pitman arm, there's nothing broken or cracked on the pitman arm, and that there's no play or movement around to get the gearbox. Okay. Moving on, we're going to come up, we're going to make sure your power steering fluid's full. Then we're going to come over, we're going to check and make sure that everything lined down the frame is going to be connected. There's no fasteners or bolts loose or missing. Alright, as soon as we find out that there's no loose or cracked bolts or anything like that, we'll come down, we'll make sure the shock is properly connected. There's no leaking, no bolts or fasteners missing from the shock. After we check all that, we're going to come on down to the spring hanger below the gearbox. We're going to make sure that all the bolts and fasteners are in the spring hanger. If there's no scissoring of the leaf springs, make sure all the leaf springs are in line like they should be. Once we've checked that, we're going to make sure that the U-bolts that connect the springs to the steer axle are connected. Make sure that they got nuts on the ends, that they're securely fastened. And then go to the back of the spring hanger and make sure that it's securely fastened. Once we've checked all that on this side of the motor, then we'll go to the brake line. You want to make sure your brake chamber hose has no chafing or abrasions, no cracks or leaks, no audible air leaks. So everything looks good. Then we'll go down to the brake chamber. Make sure the brake chamber is securely fastened. Everything looks good to be in working order with that. Once we check the brake chamber, we're going to move down to the inner wheel. We're going to make sure that there's no leaking oil or fluids coming down, getting on the inside of the tire, wheel, and brake surface. Once we check that, we're going to move to the right-hand side of the truck. Side of the truck, we're going to check the alternator, make sure the alternator is bolted down, there's no cracking or anything like that. Make sure all the fins are in place, none of the fins have broke. Make sure that the serpentine belt is tight, make sure it's not too loose. Okay, then we're going to check all of our plumbing for our turbo, make sure all of our plumbing is still connected. Make sure there's no exhaust leaks here at the turbo itself. Once we check down the right-hand side of this motor, we're going to move down to the same thing as we did on the left-hand side. We're going to check the spring hanger on the right-hand side, make sure all the bolts and everything's in there, no cracked or broken parts. We're going to move down to the springs, just like on the other side. We'll make sure there's no scissoring of the springs, make sure the springs are in line with each other, make sure the U-bolts are tight, and make sure the back spring hanger is bolted up and fastened correctly. Going to move to the brake chamber just like on the other side. Make sure that the hose has no chafing or abrasions. Make sure that it's tight, there's no loose connections. and that there's no audible air leaks. Then we'll move down to the chamber just like we did on the other side. Make sure that it's connected and it's fastened tightly, and that there's no leaking of oil or any kind of lube getting on the brake surface or the inner wheel. Inside the truck, and also the left-hand side, you want to check the tires. Make sure the tires are wearing evenly. Make sure there's no abrasions on the outside of the tires. Make sure everything looks good. Also make sure that you have at least 4 30-seconds tread depth across the whole total tread depth of the whole entire tire. Once we've done that, we'll move back to the left-hand side of the truck. When we get the left-hand side of the truck, we'll start from the top, working our way down. Start at the top, make sure everything looks good. Make sure the mirror bracket's connected. No cracked mirrors or anything like that. Want to open the door, make sure the door's not sagging, make sure the door is like it's supposed to be, and with good working order. Make sure your door handle's working so you can enter and exit the vehicle. Alright, then we're going to check all the way down the side of the truck, make sure everything's in good working order. When we get to the back, we're going to make sure that the catwalk is secured. There's nothing on the catwalk to keep you from falling when you're hooking up your trailer or anything. We're going to check your fuel cap. Fuel cap right here. Make sure the fuel cap's in good working order. Make sure the spring and everything's inside. The rubber O-ring that keeps it from leaking's in there to keep your fuel from leaking out. Once we check that, we'll stick our head over inside the frame and check the drive line. Make sure that there's no loose parts on your drive line. Make sure there's no rubbing or anything. Make sure everything is good working order, that everything's tight. Once we've looked at the drive line, we'll move right here to the spring hanger. Make sure that everything's tight, everything has a bolt in it on the spring hanger. Make sure there's no cracked or missing parts, okay? From there, we'll follow it back. We'll follow the springs back and we'll get to the airbag. Once we get to the airbag, we want to make sure that there's no missing or broken parts on the airbag. Make sure there's no audible leaks at the airbag. Once we check the airbag, we'll come down and we'll check the brake chamber. The brake chamber, make sure that everything's tight, it's not loose or anything missing. Make sure that there's nothing leaking on the inner side of the wheel that's contaminating brakes. Make sure there's no contamination of fluids. Also check the brake lines as we did on the front. Make sure there's no chafing or abrasion on the brake lines. Once we check that, we'll come out to the outer wheel. Make sure there's nothing missing on the outer wheel. All the lugs are good and tight. Make sure that the axle seal is not leaking. Get on the wheels. Then we'll check the tires. Alright. Make sure that the tires on your tandem are wearing evenly. They can't be less than 2 36ths of an inch. So you always make sure they're wearing evenly, and you make sure there's nothing in between your dual set that can be slung out on the road. Always check in between the dual set to make sure there's no obstructions or anything going to come out in the road. Once we get that, we're going to check the fifth wheel mounting. Make sure that all of the bolts are in the fifth wheel mounting. Make sure none of the bolts are missing. Make sure that your locking pin is working correctly. Also, look at your saddle mount. Make sure there's no cracks on it and that it's in good working order. Come to the back of the truck. We're going to look at the mud flaps. Make sure they're meeting requirements and they're not bent up towards the wheel, and that they're actually making coverage for the wheels. Then we're going to check our back lights. Get you to turn on the lights. All right, left, right, brake. That's good. All right, in reverse. That's good. That'll pretty much be it for as far as the road tractor itself.
All right, everybody. Now we're going to do another video on the trailer, which is very important, and I appreciate all of y'all sticking around to see that. All right, and remember, subscribe to our YouTube channel, okay? And like us and hit that alarm button to know when we have a new video coming up. Thanks so much.